Amen. We turn to Torah study. So we turn to page Kimitzion. 1 second. Find it here.
67.
67? Thank you. Yeah, I'm on page 67 in the last two. Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah, u'Torah Adonai Yerushalayim. Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah, u'Torah Adonai Yerushalayim. Baruch shenatan Torah le'amo Yisrael b'kedushato. Baruch shenatan Torah le'amo Yisrael b'kedushato. To the blessings. Baruch et Adonai hamavorah. On page 69. Baruch atah Baruch le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Elohim melech haolam. Asher bachar banu im kol ha'amim ve'natan lanu et torato. Baruch Yasher binanu tenet ha'Torah. Amen. Good Shabbos, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to our Beit Tikkun services this morning and Torah study. I hope people are doing well today. Do we want to just go around before we start and say, if you're new to our space, you want to say hello? You can look in that camera because that's where they're going to see you if you're in the room. And then you can also maybe see folks on the screen. So if this is one of your first times being here, you want to say hello and welcome yourself, bring yourself into this space in a more present way, feel free to just unmute and say your name and where you're zooming in from. And we're so glad you're here.
Hi, I'm Austin. I use he, him pronouns. I'm zooming in from Yocut Land, aka Fresno, California. And I'm your Zoom.
Thank you, Austin. Thanks for reminding me to ask for pronouns.
I'm Stephen Sondheim. I'm here for the first time. Actually, I used to live in California. I live in Chicago now. And I knew Rabbi Lerner. I have so much respect for Rabbi Lerner and Kat. And I attend sometimes, and it's just so positive and nice to be here with you all. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm David, and I don't really care what pronouns people use. And I've gone to Beit Tikkun services at Michael's home, but this is my first time in this space. And when I heard it was Emeryville, it seemed so far away. And I realized that it was like the emails that are just a few blocks from Bart and easy to get to. And I'm glad that I'm here.
Thank you for being here.
My name is Dio, and I'm a human being. And this is my second time here and in this living room, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you.
I live in West Berkeley.
Anyone else? Can you read what it says in the chat for us, Austin? Because I can't.
Sure.
Thank you.
So it's from October. Pronouns are it, its. I'm not in a setting where I can unmute, but hi, I'm October. I use it, its pronouns, and I'm zooming in from Treaty 6 territory for the first time. Looking forward to studying with y'all. Heart.
Thank you for being here. Wonderful. Anyone else want to unmute? Okay.
I'm Roger Stoll. I live in San Rafael, which is Miwok territory, I think. And hello.
Hi, Roger. Thanks for being here.
I'm Rick Charnas. I'm zooming in from Boston, Massachusetts, where we're still right in the middle of winter, but I'm starting some flower seeds, which you can see behind me. And that's snapdragon and hollyhock.
Nice, beautiful. Anyone else want to bring your name and presence into the space? Please do so.
Mark, and he, him, them, and pronouns. And I'm from Western Massachusetts, Shelburne Falls, Mass.
Wonderful. Thanks for being here. I see you're saying you're Jacqueline, but you're still muted.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jacqueline Swartz. I'm from San Francisco, but I've lived for many years in Toronto, Canada, where I am now.
Thanks for being here, Jacqueline.
I'm David, and I live in Oakland.
David's in Albany. David, there's some crackly. Anyone else? Okay. So before we start reading, I just want to set us up where we are this week. So last week, if you listen to my teachings, my musings, we were in that spiritual, mystical high place of receiving the 10 speech acts, right? And there's like a jolt to this week. We got this spiritual download, and now this week we're in the nitty-gritty of these ordinances or these laws of how are we supposed to live as a community. So like the giving of the Torah is the climax of a singular experience of revelation, right? Like just imagine that for a moment, right? This intense download. And then the laws and ordinances that we're going to read this week represent the day-to-day obligations we have for how we are going to build a just and compassionate society. So the way I like to think about it is like the ordinances or the laws are the ways in which we embody the divine, how it is we're going to walk in God's path. We can have these broad principles of the 10 speech acts, but what does that really mean in the manifestation of our daily lives? So it's how can we manifest divine download, divine love as individuals, but also collectively as a society. And as we read today, I can point out some places where the laws switch back and forth between the singular, this is how we are to live as an individual, to the collective. This is how we're to live as a community, and to the collective consequences if we as individuals don't embody these values. So it's as if like these broad concepts are not quite tangible or concrete enough for us. So we need a way to understand how to really move with them and live them. And remember, we're coming out of slavery. So we're coming out of an Egyptian society and this Torah is really an opportunity of teaching to say, don't be Egyptian. Don't be like that oppressive imperial society that you came from. Be something else. Be this. So I guess I just want to open with the following questions for us. And you can just reflect on it, and then we'll just reflect for a moment or two, and then we can share if we want. So Revelation was the spectacular, I like to always say, a pyrotechnic show. And we might experience revelation in our life at times. We might experience a divine download and feel uplifted and inspired. But then what do we do with that? How do we harness that energy of upliftment? Maybe you've gone on a retreat and you've experienced it. Maybe you've been in Shabbat services, God willing, and have experienced it. Maybe you've been in nature and experienced just some divine sense of the awe and wonder of it all. And it really uplifts and inspires you. And then you return and you have to do life, right? You have to pick your kids up from school. You have to turn to your partner who maybe you've just had a fight with. You have to go to work where you're in the nitty gritty of it all. And so how do we integrate these two ways of being in the world, both the possibility of experiencing this download and then carrying that download into our lives. So I'm just going to ask you to sit with that for a moment. Maybe think of a time in your life where perhaps you've had that moment of revelation, where you've recognized the interconnectedness of it all, or where you've been able to rise above some petty hurt, and to really see the divine in someone else or in the world itself. So tap into that experience for a moment and just feel how that is in your body. And then reflect upon, and then what happened when you returned to the mundane normalcy of life itself? Were you able to hold on to it? What did you do? Does anybody want to share?
I certainly had experiences of, like a sense of awe, like realizing how small I am when compared to, the majesty of the world. And yeah, I mean, it's really great to experience that in one moment. And I've never been able to kind of like hold on to that when, my partner is fetching or, I have problems with the client and all those other petty annoyances. I lose it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah.
I always paint the world with a broad paintbrush, and it's really hard for me to get down into particulars and to communicate. And I'm trying to put together performance, and so I think what my action will be to work with a friend who's a playwright, uh, um, and to help me to hone down my broad paintbrush God connection to exact words so I can put it out into performance and maybe even conversation with others.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Morning, this is Heidi.
Hi.
Hi, Kat, how are you?
Good.
So I'm thinking about a time that I was in my role as physician, and I was evaluating this maybe 8 or 9 year old boy who had been shamed and humiliated at school because he had very prominent tics, and I was in the moment with this boy and I spoke to him, and I don't know where the words came from. They came through me. They didn't come from me. They came through me. And I was able to talk to this beautiful little boy and help him find his own beauty and place. He was bright. He was really physically talented, like in sport. Um, and and I was able to help strip away these environmental circumstances that were making him feel small and really make him feel elevated. And his parents saw it and they saw how they could work with him. And it was a divine moment. I was just unaware of anything else in the world but my connection to this child and his family. And I just felt like it wasn't me speaking, it was a force of love in the universe that I had the privilege to channel. And that felt very divine.
That is so beautiful. Thank you, Heidi. Gorgeous. Anyone else? Okay, so this parsha to me is an example of this balance that we try to strike between moments of divine inspiration and connection, and then channeling that into how we live our lives and how we do that as individuals and as a community. So we'll now read the parsha, and I'll give me 1 second because I want to get everyone here a copy of the Tanakh, and it'll be on the screen for you all, and then I'll jump in with questions, but I'm going to grab you guys Tanakh so you can follow along if you want.
While Rabbi's doing that, would anyone, when we start, would they like to volunteer to read the parsha or part of the parsha? Jacqueline? Okay, when we start. Thank you.
Okay, do you know how to find, or do you need me to find it?
Help me find.
Okay, do you know how to find?
No, I don't.
Okay, give me 1 second. Just gotta get us to the place. Exodus chapter Bishalach. Throw. Almost there. Here it is.
Are we ready? Shall I start?
Not quite. Give me a moment, please.
Sure, just let me know.
Yeah, thank you so much,
Yeah, I
Jacqueline.
will help too.
Yep, I'm gonna find it for
Okay.
everyone, no problem. Oh, it turned right to it, so 157. I suspect this is actually going to be the same page.
Oh, thank you. 21?
Mishpatim, yep, 21. 1 second, I'm just gonna open it in mine.
Let's see. Do I have that? Glasses.
Okay, we're good, thank you.
Okay. These are the rules that you shall set before them. When you acquire a Hebrew slave, that person shall serve 6 years and shall go free in the 7th year without payment. If the
Stop you for 1 moment. So for those looking in the Tanakh here, you'll notice, or you might notice, depending on what version we're using there, the language is going to be slightly different because it's interpretation, right? So it's interpretation/translation, but every translation is also an interpretation. So just, okay, Jacqueline, thank you.
If a slave came single, he shall leave single. If he had a wife, his wife shall leave with him. If his master gave him a wife, and she has borne him children, the wife and her children shall belong to the master, and he shall leave alone. But if the slave declares, I love my master and my wife and children, I do not wish to go free, his master shall take him before God. He shall be brought to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall then remain his master's slave for life. When a parent sells a daughter as a slave, she shall not go free as other slaves do. If she proves to be displeasing to her master who designated her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He shall not have the right to sell her to outsiders, since he broke faith with her. And if the master designated her for a son, he shall deal with her as the practice with free maidens. If he takes another, he must not withhold from this one her food, her clothing, or her conjugal rights. If he fails her in these 3 ways, she shall go free without payment. One who fatally strikes another party shall be put to death. If a man did so, but not by design, it came about by an act of God, I will assign you a place to which he can flee. When one party schemes against another and kills through treachery, you shall take that person from my very altar to be put to death. One who strikes one's father or mother shall be put to death. One who kidnaps another party, whether having sold or still holding the victim, shall be put to death. One who insults one's father or mother shall be put to death. When parties quarrel and one strikes another with stone or fist, and the victim does not die, but has to take to bed, if that victim then gets up and walks outdoors upon a staff, the assailant shall go unpunished, except for paying for the idleness and the cure. When a slave-owning party strikes a slave, male or female, with a rod, who dies there, and then this must be avenged. But if the victim survives a day or two, this is not to be avenged, since the one is the other's property. When parties fight and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and a miscarriage results, but no other damage ensues, the one responsible shall be fined according as the woman's husband may exact, the payment to be based on reckoning. But if other damage ensues, the penalty shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. When a slave-owning party strikes the eye of a slave, male or female, and destroys it, that person shall let the slave go free on account of the eye. If the owner knocks out the tooth of a slave, male or female, that person shall let the slave go free on account of the tooth. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox is not to be punished. If, however, that ox has been in the habit of goring, and its owner, though warned, has failed to guard it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner, too, shall be put to death. If ransom is imposed, the owner must pay whatever is imposed to redeem the owner's own life. So, too, if it gores a minor, male or female, its owner shall be dealt with according to the same rule. But if the ox gores a slave, male or female, its owner shall pay 30 shekels of silver to the master, and the ox shall be stoned. When any party opens a pit, or when any party digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or an ass falls into it, the one responsible for the pit must make restitution, paying the price to the owner, but keeping the dead animal. When any party's ox injures a neighbor's ox and it dies, they shall sell the live ox and divide its price. They shall also divide the dead animal. If, however, it is known that the ox was in the habit of goring and its owner has failed to guard it, that person must restore ox for ox, but shall keep the dead animal. When any party steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, that person shall pay 5 oxen for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep.
Okay, we can look at this chapter. Of course, in the Torah, there aren't chapters, right, like in the actual Torah, but here there are. So we'll pause for a moment and try to understand what's happening here. So before I share, I'm going to give you a little bit of overview, but then I want to open it before I share some of my insights to hear yours, because you always have rich insights, and you might catch my insights before I do. So it starts, as I said, these ordinances. So, right, the last parsha I talked about was the 10 speech acts, and now we're getting down to the nitty gritty of how is the community supposed to live. And so we start with this discussion of what do you do with a slave? And probably as we're reading this today, right, we're talking about ownership of human beings and how we treat other human beings that we own. So that's horrific. Just the fact that we have this concept of ownership of human beings, right? It's horrible. And this concept of they shall work for 6 years and then on the 7th be free from the Jubilee is really a radical concept in that time. There was slavery for life. That's what the Hebrews came from. So here's one of the things I like to talk about as our inheritance as Jews is that one of the things that we're striving to do in the Torah, in our ancestry, is to move beyond the narrow constrictions of the time and place in which we live. So the Mitzrayim isn't Egypt, let's say, it's that too, but it's the metaphor of Egypt. It's we are stuck in a more narrow consciousness of how we live with one another. And the Torah and our inheritance is, how do we move beyond that constricted limitation? How do we move beyond Mitzrayim to imagine a different evolved world? And these are baby steps, and they're also radical steps. So what do you notice that's happening in this, what we've just read thus far? Any thoughts or reflections? Yeah, Jacqueline.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, some of the draconian rules, like, I mean, forget about women, which you just sort of expect to be the oppressed class, but you must be put to death if you insult your parents.
So I want to jump in with that, because the language in Hebrew is actually more nuanced than that. It says mot biyamut, which really means you will surely die. So it doesn't necessarily mean there will be an enactment of the death penalty, if you will. It means that something's going to happen if you do this, that you will surely die. In a way that a lot of the spiritual, mystical tradition interprets this is, there will be a spiritual death. You will be disconnected from your connection with divine source.
Okay, and the other thing, just to be brief, is how extremely legalistic it is. And I have to ask myself, why is that? Or ask you, why is that?
Yeah. So I'm going to let other folks, I'll come back to that question. And if I forget to answer it, come back to me. But I want to see if others have thoughts about that and other thoughts. Thank you, Jacqueline. Anyone? Yes, Stephen?
Well, I mean, it bothers me that if a man marries a woman who's enslaved and owned by the owner and she has children, that he can't leave with her.
Right.
If he's devoted to her and they're in good relationship and has his children, it's terrible.
Right.
And so I could see many men staying with her and becoming slaves for life. And that bothers me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's horrific.
I heard the words an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Besides being too much specifics on exact numbers of trading for sheep and ox, the eye for an eye or for tooth for tooth justifies Zionists killing thousands of Palestinians.
Mm. So the movement of the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth is really an effort to move from a world in which somebody could be put to death for stealing property or injuring somebody without killing them, to a world where whatever harm is enacted upon you, there will be an equal compensation. It's moving from essentially a world where people are put to death, where there's tort law, right? Where you then have civil responsibility. So that's the intention of that. It's interpreted, right, and applied in fundamentalist communities in really horrific ways that we certainly don't want to uplift. So David, and then Heidi.
I was just going to say that reading this last chapter really helps me understand why a lot of people prefer the New Testament to the Old Testament. I agree that maybe the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth is preferable to a life for a tooth, which is the way it was before this was written.
Right.
But yeah, I still have trouble with it.
Yeah, yeah, it's a complicated Torah, our Torah. Yeah, Heidi, please.
Yeah, I just keep feeling like what would it have been like to be a woman back then? I mean, Jacqueline just kind of let it go by, but I feel the constriction in my body, right? I can't imagine what it must have been like to feel so devalued and so dismissed that your whole sense of agency is completely gone. I find it just horrific.
Yes, yeah, and I'm thinking about we just came out of Mitzrayim, right? We came out of a narrow place into this so-called liberated place, and yet there's still hierarchy, there's still patriarchy, there's still classism, there's still all of these aspects of community that still create power imbalances. I mean, you can even own a slave.
That's right.
You
And
just have,
and you know the other just the one little point is that they treat the mother of their children, their whole access to, eternity in this uh, incredibly demeaning way. And I just find that fascinating.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Again, the interpretation, if you could be liberal about it and say this is an evolution, or the Israeli government is killing hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, saying that it is justified here in this book. And so we can go backwards with our evolution. For example, the Quakers, instead of cutting off one's hands for stealing, they said, let's have this place called a penitentiary where we do penance, which was started, I believe, by the Quakers.
Mhm.
And now a penitentiary is a horrible place. And so we can go backwards, even though initially it was a move forward. And so the interpretation is what we do with these words is, as human beings, can be a very horrible, horrific crimes against humanity.
Yes. Yes. Are there other folks who want to share? Please go ahead.
Can I ask, please, is this quality of building community, which I think is probably what's the focus right now, rather than individual, something that could help us a little bit here? It is not, as we understand, individual rights or any of those sorts of things, but it is really what is for the good of the community. How does one sort of generalize things more? And I think we get stuck because we're so used to individual.
Right. That is right. This is an effort to coalesce into a community. And there are still, when you're living in community, right, there are still obligations individuals have for how they treat other individuals. And then there's the obligation of the society for what do you do when individuals do not treat other individuals in ways that are life-serving. And many of these are, in fact, life-serving, and many are not so life-serving, right? But I appreciate that reminder of the kind of individualism that we live in today versus a desire to create a society of care for all of us. Other thoughts from folks?
Yeah, could I speak?
Of course.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, just a couple of things. I remember reading that the part about the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was sort of was an improvement in addition into the way that the rabbi mentioned, but it was also a way to end endless feuds. One person would injure another and they would go on for generations, perhaps, And so instead, this is sort of, no, you settle for this, you settle for the civil remedy or whatever. And the other thing is, I mean, of course, from an idealistic critique, which everybody is making, it's perfectly correct to criticize these laws in the ways we have been, but I don't feel like doing that actually. I think these laws are they're not the starting point. They're sort of an attempt to structure the society that exists at the time, and I don't necessarily think they're particularly retrograde or even worse than the laws that we have today. So, for instance, my cruelty and mass death events are outsourced. And they take place under various laws in the realm of economics and war and so forth. And in fact, even inequality and even slavery, even the status of women, there's no comparison with today, because in this society, the position of a slave materially is far less different than the position of one of the patriarchs or judges than today the differences between our elites and the global underclass. So I don't feel like looking down on the drafters of these laws. That's all. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I do think the effort being made here is to create a society that's different from what was in Egypt. And, it only goes so far. And we could certainly argue, I think, pretty strongly that there are a lot of Egyptian-like societies today in this world, including the US, and where there's incredible power imbalances in a society that allows enslavement around the world to further our military and other interests, in a society that really seems to have no problem with not choosing life again and again and again, whether it's in our gun laws or our military industrial complex or our economic system that certainly does not ultimately choose life. So it's it would be interesting to write a Torah today. I think that's what we're actually trying to do, right? Is to write our book, our teachings for how we move beyond the constricted Mitzrayim and limitations of our time today. And there's similarities between what we're reading from the past, and there are differences also. So all of that is true. Thank you, Roger. Anyone else? So one of the lines in this that jumped up to me was 22:4, which says, if a party owns livestock and allows it to graze in another's land and allows the land to become bare, restitution must be paid. Now, I'm going to assume that most people on this call know what's happening in the West Bank right now with settlers letting their sheep, not just letting their sheep, intentionally bringing their sheep to Palestinian land to graze the land and destroy the land and kick people off the land. And yet this parsha right here says you must pay restitution. And I find it interesting that the religious settlers who are acting in this particular way around stealing the Palestinian land, grazing the land with their sheep, are very selective. They're very adamant they follow the Torah, but they're very selective in which verses they're following. And the same thing, it goes on in the next line about when a fire starts and spreads and the grains and fields are consumed, restitution is owed. And we've seen settlers supported by the Israeli occupation forces burning olive trees and burning the lands, the Palestinian lands. And if Israel wants to be a Jewish nation, right, then there's opportunities for it to enact some of these laws and not actually have a separation of state and religion. But here we are watching them do something very different. So other thoughts. I'm going to just share a few others if no one else has some.
Again, I just wanted to say it's how we interpret, and Jesus said the greatest of these is love, but then they had crusades, which was just opportunist. So people take the religious scriptures to justify that they're better than the other people who are infidels or who are not of the same. They're xenophobic, and they can just so it's all in interpretation to twist the words to justify greed, and it's all, as they say, for cooking, it's all in presentation. Mm-hmm. So in the end, it's how we actually live the words, just the words.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else? We can go on to chapter 22. Folks are, which actually was some of what I was commenting on, so you'll see it here. Anyone else? Okay. Did somebody? I'm going to have someone online read, because then everyone will be reading the same thing when we find it.
Jacqueline, do you mind keep going, or you okay with that?
Yep, I'm fine. Yeah. If the thief is seized while tunneling and beaten to death, there is no blood guilt in that case. If the sun has already risen there is blood guilt in that case. The thief must make restitution, and if lacking the means, shall be sold for the theft. But if what was stolen, whether ox or ass or sheep, is found alive and in hand, that person shall pay double. When any party who owns livestock lets it loose to graze in another's land, and so allows a field or a vineyard to be grazed bare, restitution must be paid for the impairment of that field or vineyard. When a fire is started and spreads to thorns, so that stacked, standing, or growing grain is consumed, the one who started the fire must make restitution. When any party gives money or goods to another for safekeeping, and they are stolen from that other party's house, if caught, the thief shall pay double. If the thief is not caught, the owner of the house shall depose before God and deny laying hands on the other's property. In all charges of misappropriation pertaining to an ox, an ass, a sheep, a garment, or any other loss, whereof one party alleges, this is it, the case of both parties shall come before God. The one whom God declares guilty shall pay double to the other. When any party gives to another an ass, an ox, a sheep, or any other animal to guard, and it dies or is injured or is carried off with no witness about, an oath before Yud He Vav He shall decide between the two of them that the one has not laid hands on the property of the other. The owner must acquiesce, and no restitution shall be made. But if the animal was stolen from the guardian, restitution shall be made to its owner. If it was torn by beasts, the guardian shall bring it as evidence, not needing to replace what has been torn by beasts. When any party borrows an animal from another and it dies or is injured, its owner not being with it, restitution must be made. If its owner was with it, no restitution need be made. But if it was hired, that payment is due. If a man seduces a virgin for whom the bride price has not been paid and lies with her, he must make her his wife by payment of a bride price. If her father refuses to give her to him, he must still weigh out silver in accordance with the bride price for virgins. You shall not tolerate a sorceress. Whoever lies with the beast shall be put to death. Whoever sacrifices to a god other than Yud He Vav He alone shall be proscribed. You shall not wrong or oppress a stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not ill-treat any widow or orphan. If you do mistreat them, I will heed their outcry as soon as they cry out to me. And my anger shall blaze forth, and I will put you to the sword, and your own wives shall become widows, and your children orphans. If you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, do not act toward them as a creditor. Exact no interest from them. If you take your neighbor's garment in pledge, you must return it before the sun sets. It is the only available clothing. It is what covers the skin. In what else shall your neighbor sleep? Therefore, if that person cries out to me, I will pay heed, for I am compassionate. You shall not revile God, nor put a curse on a chieftain among your people. You shall not put off the skimming of the first yield of your vats. You shall give me the male firstborn among your children. You shall do the same with your cattle and your flocks. 7 days the male firstborn shall remain with its mother. On the 8th day you shall give it to me. You shall be holy people to me. You must not eat flesh torn by beasts in the field. You shall cast it to the dogs.
Okay, we're going to chapter now. Thank you, Jacqueline.
A lot to take in.
Yeah. So anyone want to share any of their thoughts from this chapter? It goes from these distinct laws to, once again, love, do not oppress the stranger.
Well, this is Stephen. It reminds me of the beginnings of restorative justice.
Mm-hmm.
in not a punishing or hurting way. The person responsible for trouble to the other, the best way would be for them to make right by it. And then somehow in our society, or maybe originally, we got into punishment as well. And of course, there's violent crimes where the person committing the crime is dangerous. And that's a different story. But restorative justice is a wonderful thing. And a little bit, I spent some time in South Africa. The Peace and Reconciliation Project, when a person really came to grips, some of them I think just faked it. I'm sorry, I won't do that again. But when a person really faced the person they hurt and realized the hurt and came to grips with it, it was a lot of healing. And what I call a lot of permanent healing. In other words, it didn't go on and on and on and on with resentment. So, and I see influence of that here. And I like it.
Thank you. Someone else?
Neil?
It's a very powerful reading, and it seems to ground us in, if we have a lived experience of it, it seems real. In a post-industrial society where there's so many layers of alienation, for example, somebody who is involved in stocks and bonds or a lawyer for a petroleum company, they don't really have the visceral sense of, man, if I'm doing this, such as the Chevron refinery in Richmond, my actions are causing respiratory problems to living, breathing people. So if we take these same principles of accountability for whether it was intended or not, rules and regulations and accountabilities, and found a way to apply this on the larger, more abstract levels, that would be a great step forward. I'm not saying anything that isn't obvious to anyone else, that the Trump's policy is to pull the plug on regulatory commissions for the very reason of not wanting to be held accountable and have unbridled predatory capitalistic policies. So the issue is, how do we create enough common ground with the general public that this is not a left-right issue. This is a people versus illegitimate elites.
Thank you. Nice. Thank you, Neil. Anyone else have their hand up or want to share?
Yeah.
Joyce has her hand up. Can you see?
Go ahead, Joyce.
Yeah, thank you. Should I go ahead?
Yep.
Thank you. Does it explain further on what give the child to me on the 8th day means?
So what it is like you become in service to God. So the child is with the parents for 8 days, and then they go and serve God. They become basically a priest. So what we do now is that's when boys are generally circumcised, and part of that process is you essentially give a little bit of money. You're trading the money to keep your child. So that's really what that's about. It's not sacrificing in terms of killing your child, but it's giving your child over to divine service.
Well, does it explain that somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, in the Talmud and in other teachings, it explains that. It doesn't explain it in the Torah so much.
Well, I wonder what people made of it then, though. I mean, if everybody knew what it meant, how did they know? Anyway.
Yeah, I mean,
to me, it's questionable.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And somebody else had unmuted to share. Maybe that was Joyce, or maybe it was someone else. Please go ahead.
Jacqueline?
Yes, well, I wanted to ask you, Kat, what your take is. I just found this a very rich text with a lot happening, and I'd just like to hear from you.
Yeah. So I can share. I just want to make sure others have their opportunity to share before I do. But I will. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Just wanted to add that there's an apology, but deeper than apology is an amends and another spiritual path. I mean, we do amends, and the amends is not only to do right for the other person, but to free the demons, to heal ourselves of that behavior.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just going to go through it a little bit. I already touched upon some of it in terms of the animals grazing on the land and the fire. So I'm thinking about how this moves, right? Because it comes to these very specific things between individuals, but then it talks about caring for the stranger, right? Not oppressing the stranger and the other. Before it does that, it talks about not sacrificing to another god. And it says you shall be banned or destroyed or exiled, depends on how you want to interpret that. And one of the things I found interesting about that was in today's reality in which we're living, you've probably heard me talk a lot if you've watched my videos and been to our Torah studies, that I think there's a lot of idolizing going on right now in the Jewish world, idolizing of a nation state. And I would even say we idolize our trauma. We continually turn to our trauma as what we want to uplift, and we weaponize it, and it's weaponized also, right? Instead of doing what this parsha and what our Torah teaches us, which is to focus on the liberation. We were liberated. We moved out of this restricted place, and it doesn't tell us to go back and relive the trauma. It tells us to relive and reenact the act of liberation. It doesn't say go back and practice this slavery. It says imagine that moment in which you fled, in which you chose to enact bravery and courage, and then to walk to your liberation. And then this whole journey in Exodus is a continuing process of your liberation journey. And so, when it talks about being banned or destroyed, I think what's, again, in the spiritual realm, what that's really meaning is you end up being disconnected from divine source, right? From the source of love and compassion and justice and liberation. And you end up being connected to an idol, a god of idol, the idol god of land, of money, of power. So that's one thing. The other thing is this really interesting thing that happens. So we see this in what we just read, this part where it says, you shall not wrong or oppress the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt, right? Like this is repeated in one way or another, and I'm going to elaborate on this in a minute, 36 times in our Torah, more than any other mitzvah. And really what this is telling us, right, is we don't have a word in Hebrew for empathy, actually. It's an English version, empathico. Like it's not a Hebrew word, but it is core, right? It is a core teaching right here. Remember what you were slaves. Remember that you were the stranger, and therefore don't enact that in others. Don't recreate Egypt. Create something different. And what's interesting about this is it says it goes from so ger, the term that's used here, is the same term that we were referred to as strangers in Egypt. So some translations you'll actually say, like in the more conservative one I'm looking at, they translate ger as proselyte, meaning the convert. But we weren't converts in Egypt. We were strangers in Egypt, right? So it's the non-citizen, it's the other, it's the vulnerable, which one should think we should apply right to the Palestinians. And what's, the Torah could have done something very different here. The Torah could have told us to hold on to our trauma. The Torah could have said to us, you were oppressed, and our history, this is kind of what we're doing right now, but the Torah could have said, You were oppressed and no one protected you and no one rose up and you were alone. So don't care about anybody else, only care about yourself. The Torah could have told us to enwrap ourselves in our victimhood, but it didn't. It told us to enact ourselves in our liberation, to have empathy and compassion and care for the other. Don't become one who exploits or degrades the other. And then, of course, it says, if you forget and you become the oppressor, this is right. I will hear their cries and heed them and put you to the sword. Your wives will become widows and your children orphans. You are not just given a free pass. It's a covenant. It's a covenant to create a loving, kind, caring community. And if you don't, the same thing that happened to Egypt will happen to you. And so in the Parsha, it's in this Parsha, right? It's in the negative, do not oppress. When we get to Leviticus, we see it again. And it shifts from the negative of do not oppress to the positive. You shall love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And then in Deuteronomy, we're taught that loving the stranger is the way that we walk in God's path. That, we hear a lot that God is the King of Kings because we use that language, right? But in Deuteronomy, God is the King of Kings, not because God created the universe, but because God cares and loves about and protects the oppressed. And so if we want to be like God, walk in God's path, that is our journey, to tap into our empathy. In these verses that we just read here, it's very interesting. In line 22, it says, if you dare to cause him pain, the stranger, he will cry out and I will hear his pain, and my wrath shall blaze against you and I shall kill you, essentially. It's moving from if you in the singular, you as an individual, one person in your society does this, my blaze will enact, my rage will enact upon all of you, plural. And so even Ezra, who's a Sephardic commentator from the Middle Ages, what he's saying is that even if a single person acts in this way, the entire community is responsible and will suffer the consequences for mistreating the stranger. And the Talmud has this wonderful teaching that I've brought up many times, which is that if you are seeing a wrong happening in your family, in your community, or in your world, and you do not intervene, you do not try to stop it, you are responsible for that wrong. And I think it's connected to this right here, because if you create a society where individuals can get away with harming others and oppressing the vulnerable, then the entire, it corrupts the society. It just isn't about corrupting the individual and harming the individual. It creates a corruptive, corrosive society. And I think that's really powerful. And right, this part of this parsha right here is teaching us that what the divine manifestation of God's voice in this, that's articulated through human script, right, through human writing and words, is that we are being told to create a society that is the opposite of empire, that's the opposite of Egypt, where the downtrodden and vulnerable are cared for and loved, not oppressed or exploited. So those are some of my thoughts about this part of this parsha and the movement from the, caring and being conscious, and then moving to think about the stranger. Those are the ones you really have to bring into your circle. And I think it says that because it's so easy for us to walk by them, right? It's so easy to not see our unhoused neighbors, to not enact caring and kindness upon the oppressed. And this is telling us if you do it as an individual, the social structures of your society, your whole society, the moral foundation of your society becomes corrosive. Yeah, David.
I guess I have a couple of thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
One is that this idea of collective punishment for the member of one community, I think that's been used by the IDF to punish Palestinian communities because somebody in that community acted out. And so I have problems with that. And then I guess the other thing I have problems with is that if somebody lives in the Tenderloin, I can't leave my apartment without seeing in-house people or without being in the presence of in-house people. Like this morning, there was somebody, half a block from my apartment, like kind of lying on the street. And if I really saw each person in that situation, I would find it very hard to function.
Right. So absolutely. So regarding the first thing about, the collective punishment that's being enacted on Gaza, the difference, I think, is that that's not divine intervention. Yeah. That's human intervention. And the Torah is very clear about not engaging in collective punishment for humans, right? So that's a difference. And obviously there's laws that uphold that too. In terms of how do we, I've actually set intentions some days. I don't do it every day. To every single person I see, to see them as a manifestation of the divine. So if I see an unhoused person or I have to remind myself that they too are a manifestation of the divine. And yeah, then it becomes kind of overwhelming. How do we then live? And I don't have the answer to that question, but I'd like for there to be an experiment. Like maybe every Shabbat, right? Maybe once a month. Each one of us tries to move through the world that way and stretches our capacity. And maybe that just means we hold them in our hearts. Maybe that means that day we do some offering, donate money, give them money, cook a meal, engage in some way to create the world that we want to have manifested. And this parsha also teaches that it does matter how we act as individuals and how we create a society that uplifts everyone. So it's upon us, Elenu, right? It's upon us, but it's upon us, and it's upon us as individuals. And so I think we have to find that balance, each of us, for how do we recognize that we are living in a corrosive society, right? It is horrific how many people are unhoused, and it doesn't have to be that way. And so what are the actions we can take that allow us to feel like we're contributing to building the world we want, that also allows us to have joy and meaning and love and lightness in our life? And each of us has to find that balance. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, that makes sense.
Okay.
Roger has his hand up.
Please, Roger.
Roger, you're muted.
Muted, sorry. Am I still muted?
Nope, we can hear you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, spinning off what the rabbi and everyone else was talking about, just to put this in sort of other terms. Well, first, I was reading a Bible commentary that I've had for like 40 years. It's a one-volume thing, and it mentions that the origin of the word Hebrew might be Habiru, which refers to a sort of an underclass that often sold itself into indentured servitude or slavery. So in other words, even the word Hebrew is sort of a class designation rather than a tribal or ethnic or religious designation. And similarly, like the rabbi's interpretation of the prescriptions about strangers, about how to treat strangers, that is kind of an exhortation to feel or express class solidarity in a way, and I find that right in line with the comment, I guess it was from the Talmudic Rabbi Ezra that you mentioned collective punishment. Well, setting collective punishment aside, there is such a thing as collective guilt. I think it's kind of a good thing, and much of the Western world thought it was a good thing after World War II that Germans should feel collective guilt. So anyway, I find all these ideas like they have to do with class solidarity, and that's all.
Beautiful, thank you. Another root of the word Hebrew is boundary crossers. So that's another boundary, passing over, like crossing. So like boundary crossers, moving over boundaries, and so it's another interesting, which could also be another way of thinking about class solidarity, right? That's beautiful. Thank you so much for bringing that in. Anyone else?
Said it before and I'll say it again because it's poetry. Whoever saves a single life whoever destroys a single life is as if they destroy the whole world, and whoever saves a single life is as if they have saved the whole world, from the Talmud.
Yeah, it's a beautiful teaching. Thank you. Okay, no one else right now? Okay. Oh, did we read? Give me 1 second.
Hey, Rabbi, can I bring something in just real quick? I put it in.
Of course.
Because we were talking about sometimes the overwhelm, with all the work that needs to be done in the world. And I just want to bring in that classic Rabbi Tarfon quote.
Yes, thank you.
You're not required to finish the work, yet neither are you permitted to desist from it.
Right.
So, there's kind of a nice little...
Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay, great. Let's read. Thank you so much, Austin, for adding that into this.
Thanks.
Okay, let's keep going because there's something I want to bring up that's right here. So go ahead.
You must not carry false rumors. You shall not join hands with the guilty to act as a malicious witness. You shall neither side with the mighty to do wrong. You shall neither side with the mighty to do wrong. You shall not give perverse testimony in a dispute so as to pervert it in favor of the mighty, nor shall you show deference to a poor person in a dispute. When you encounter your enemy's ox or ass wandering, you must take it back. When you see the ass of your enemy lying under its burden and would refrain from raising it, you must nevertheless help raise it. You shall not subvert the rights of your needy in their disputes. Keep far from a false charge. Do not bring death on those who are innocent and in the right, for I will not acquit the wrongdoer. Do not take bribes, for bribes blind the clear-sighted and upset the pleas of those who are in the right. You shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of a stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt. 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield. But in the 7th you shall let it rest and lie fallow. Let the needy among your people eat of it, and what they leave let the wild beasts eat. You shall do the same with your vineyards and your olive groves. 6 days you shall do your work, but on the 7th day you shall cease from labor, in order that your ox and your ass may rest, and that your homeborn slave and the stranger may be refreshed. Be on guard concerning all that I have told you. Make no mention of the names of other gods. They shall not be heard on your lips. 3 times a year you shall hold a festival for me. You shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, eating unleavened bread for the 7 days, as I have commanded you, at the set time in the month of Abib, for in it you went forth from Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty-handed. And the feast of the harvest, of the first fruits of your work, of what you sow in the field, and the feast of ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in the results of your work from the field. 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the sovereign Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with anything leavened, and the fat of my festal offering shall not be left lying until morning. The choice first fruits of your soil you shall bring to the house of your God, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. I'm sending a messenger before you to guard you on the way and to bring you to the place that I have made ready. Pay heed to him and obey him. Do not defy him, for he will not pardon your offenses, since my name is in him. But if you obey him and do all that I say, I will be an enemy to your enemies and a foe to your foes. When my messenger goes before you and brings you to the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I annihilate them, you shall not bow down to their gods in worship or follow their practices, but shall tear them down and smash their pillars to bits. You shall serve your God, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, who will bless your bread and your water, and I will remove sickness from your midst. No woman in your land shall miscarry or be barren. I will let you enjoy the full count of your days. I will send forth my terror before you, and I will throw into panic all the people among you who come, and I will make all your enemies turn tail before you. I will send a plague ahead of you, and it shall drive out before you the Hivites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites. I will not drive them out before you in a single year, lest the land become desolate and the wild beasts multiply to your hurt. I will drive them out before you little by little until you have increased and possessed the land. I will set your borders from the Sea of Reeds to the Sea of Philistia, and from the wilderness to the Euphrates. For I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your lands, and you will drive them out before you. You shall make no covenant with them and their gods. They shall not remain in your land, lest they cause you to sin against me. For you will serve their gods, and it will prove a snare to you.
Okay, let's pause again. Thank you. Thank you so much for your reading. Okay, so there's some problematic parts in this. But before I reflect on teasing out some parts and interpreting it, where are folks' questions or thoughts in this chapter?
How about owning parts of the land? I wasn't sure which parts it meant exactly.
I have to remember where that was. Give me a moment. So the interesting thing here is earlier in the Torah, when it talks about you will go to a land of milk and honey, it says, and the Canaanites are there and all these other peoples are there. It doesn't say that it doesn't say that God will drive them out. It just says you will go to this land of abundance. And it's really interesting to me that it says that, because it's the way I read the earlier rendition of this is, you too will go to that land. It's an abundant land. All these people are living there, and you will go and live there too. Now we're in a later place. Maybe this is written later than the earlier parshas. The earlier part of the Torah, we don't really know what was written when, and when it was codified. And now we're exiled, and this is the story of an exiled people who want power, right? Who want to feel secure and safe. And so the teaching is, well, we're going to kick the other people out, because otherwise you're going to bow down to their gods, which is what was happening. And then they were kicked out of the land. So that's the way I read this, is just a manifestation of disempowered people who are writing a part of the Torah in the voice of domination and power over. And in the voice of domination and power over, we have to get rid of the other. And when you get rid of the other, be sure not to bow down to their gods. And we could think about it like, this is maybe this is a stretch, maybe not. In our society, Jews certainly, and most others, have adopted the ethos of individualism, of capitalism, of domination and power over. And the Torah is saying to us, no, reject those idols. Reject the idols of the societies that you go to and really live in accordance with the teachings of the Torah. So that's how I read that part about, taking the land. The Torah does say in, I believe it's in Leviticus, or no, it's in Deuteronomy. And it also just said it earlier in Exodus too. We just read it a couple weeks ago. The land is mine. The land is God's. You are mere sojourners on this land. You don't own the land. Others?
Mark has his hand up.
Please, Mark. Thank you, Austin.
Thanks, Austin. I think you were actually saying what I was going to say in a way, that the earlier part of what was just read was all about relational, how we relate to the other beings, including the animals, and to be in a relational rather than a transactional encounter with others is important. What we're aligning ourselves with life when we do that. And then when that happens, then there's a distinction between that life-giving property that we are aligning ourselves with, and then we get into the other material that I don't need to go into. But
that's beautiful, Mark. Thank you. That's really beautiful. They're piggybacking on that for a moment. Early in the beginning of the parsha, it says, if you encounter an ox of your enemy or donkey wandering, you shall return it. If you see the donkey of someone you hate crouching under its burden, would you refrain from helping him? You shall repeatedly help him. And this to me is a great teaching about how do we engage with the person we hate, with our enemy, right? This is an opportunity for repairing broken relationships. You see their animal wandering, and you have an obligation to take the animal of the hated person you hate, and not only help it, but actually go back to the person and bring it to them and work with them. If it's fallen down, you have to help lift it up with them. And it's a model for repairing breaks in relationships. And I know that there's been times when I have certainly been in strife with people, and that would have been the last thing I wanted to do in that moment, right? So it's a very in the society at the time where animals were wandering and stuff, and there was a lot of strife probably about that, and fights in community about that, and disputes about that. Here it is, like, even if you're in dispute, you still have to help your enemy.
there's another part that I don't think we didn't quite get to Shemitah and all that yet.
No.
But is this idea of how do we respond locally as in our own local communities to plan and to organize around respect for others and respect for the earth. And my question is, how do we resource this as a tool to kind of leverage ourselves into that right relationships with all other beings and such?
Beautiful. Well, it does touch upon it here, actually, right? Because it says in the 7th year, you shall 6 years you will sow your land, your field, and gather in its produce. And in the 7th year, you'll let it rest. And you're letting it rest. And in the 6 days, you will do all your work. And on the 7th day, you will rest. And not only will you rest, but so will all your animals. So will everyone within your gates. So will your slaves. Why? So that you can be re-ensouled. So your nefesh, you can be, it says refreshed was, I think, the way it was read, but it's soul. So you can be re-ensouled. And it said here in this parsha, it talked about do not oppress the stranger. We got it again here. And this time it says, because you know the feelings of a stranger. It's nefesh. You have the soul of the stranger. You have it in your kishkas. You know that experience.
Yeah, so that's what's crucial for me about that is it speaks to a quality of ourselves and a quality of the earth that is wild. And we're leaving open the fields for animals to graze as well, and wild animals, I suppose. And and we're returning to like hunter-gatherer quality of being, and that we're just like eating off of the land without asking of it more than that land can yield. So that's really powerful, and what to do with that.
It is really beautiful, right? And I love the way you brought in it's about being in the right relationship with each other and with the land. And we're a people of the book, but we're also a people that's really connected to land and to how we engage with and treat land. And I think it's really important for us to remember that we're, the Torah reminds us that we're embodied beings. You're refreshing your soul once a week. You're letting other people's souls and bodies be refreshed once a week. Every 7 years, you're also supposed to completely rest, and the land's supposed to completely rest, because we need that regeneration.
And to think of how wild animals, or animals that these other beings, they are strangers to us often, unless we have a personal relationship with live in a forested landscape and have relationships with all these trees and all these animals in a certain way. So how do we care for them even though they're strangers to us?
Yeah. Beautiful. Anyone else?
Lynn has her hand up.
Hello. I wonder whether I dare bring this up, but I'm actually concerned very deeply. I know a very a very dear person who is absolutely stymied about that sense of going against what is her own sense of what is the right work to do, because she's in a place which is about sanctions and being told that she needs to apply sanctions that she cannot agree to, and how to counsel those who we are talking about how do we judge correctly the situation to be able to live with what is a right action right here. It will cost something. It will, depend on what, now in the present political situation, it seems as if the only thing to do is to resign. But how does one deal with this kind of a problem right now?
Yeah, I think ultimately, maybe out of this challenge and tragedy, maybe one of the opportunities, I'll say, maybe it's not a blessing, but maybe one of the opportunities it gives us, each of us, is to figure out what our deepest moral boundaries are. What is our North Star, or what is our rod of where we're going to put our foot down? And maybe, I have felt during this genocide in Gaza that's been asked of me many times, like, where is my bottom line? Where am I going to put my stake in the ground, if you will? And there'll be consequences for that, or there could be consequences for that. And so, maybe this moment, which is horrific and scary and unsettling, is also an opportunity to call each of us to really find our moral center. And each of us has to go inside and find that. And we can obviously engage in conversations with others to help us find that. But ultimately, that's our calling, right? That's what's the divine telling each one of us to do in this moment, and how do we find that? So I think that I'm gonna, given the time, I'm gonna wrap us up with that question. So I'm going to just lead us in a very short little meditation. There was a few more lines in the next chapter, and Austin was going to bring in something really sweet. And maybe Austin, after this, if you want to share a thought from this, please feel free to do so. But I just want to ask us to close our eyes and maybe imagine ourselves in a bit of an instability, maybe an earthquake, maybe a whirlpool, just something where, the world that we know, the touchstones that we normally rely on, maybe perhaps some of the stability that we're comfortable with is being jostled, right? It's being stirred up. There's a lot of uncertainty. Harm is being enacted. And let's imagine for a moment we're in a space where perhaps we can hear or feel divine source. And please, if you don't hear it or feel it now, don't worry, it's all good. There's plenty of opportunities. You can bring this to yourself in another time, in another space. Maybe if you're in nature or you're in a place where you're more open, it's all good. Sometimes we experience it, sometimes we don't. But just imagine for a moment that you're at Sinai, as all of us were. And that there's some unique way that the divine speaks to you. Because we're all here in this moment alive with our unique, special connections and wisdom and gifts. And so there's a unique way that the divine speaks to each one of us, each one of you. And what is the message? What is the place that you are willing to stand? And if you've maybe touched the surface of it, maybe you'll come back to this later. I invite you to take your hands and put them on your heart. And just honor yourself. This is the day to re-ensoul yourself. So honor that soul, that inner self within you. And honor the deepest truth of who you are and of what you're called for in this moment in time. And there'll be abundant opportunities to continually come back to this place, to re-explore it, to find new answers to this question. But may each of us, may each of you, may all of us find our inner deepest truth, our inner calling, the way that we can be of service to do what we can, and to know we do not have to finish the work. And we are called, even commanded, to do what we can. Thank you, Lynn, for bringing that into our space. When you're ready, you can open your eyes, and we will continue with the prayer. And Austin, if there's something you want to add from your Torah study from earlier this week to close us, please feel free to share.
Yeah, sure. Share a little bit. Shabbat shalom. So we didn't quite get to it, but at the end of this parsha is the tablets. So Moshe is going up to the mountain to receive the Ten Commandments from Hashem, right? So that for me, it's wild to think that we've got all these laws in this parsha, and we haven't even got to the Ten Commandments. So it's like this setup, right? But in the verse, I'll just read it. I won't share it. Hashem said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and wait there, and I will give you the stone tablets with the teachings and commandments which I have inscribed to instruct them." Okay, seems pretty straightforward. But if you look at the word wait and the Hebrew word, it actually translated differently. It's not wait. The word means to be, to exist, to be in existence. So this idea that Moshe is going up to the top of this mountain and to get into that, like Rabbi Kat talked about in the beginning, the space for divine download, right? Rashi calls it spiritual readiness. So we just talked about and posited this question to take with us through the week. How can we find places, like Rabbi Kat touched on in the beginning, to receive that, to be spiritually ready, right? If we don't have the ability or the means or to go to these secluded places, these, typically ascetic activities to find that spiritual readiness. So that was just one question that we decided that we were going to carry with us through the week, in everyday life, in the mundane, where can we find places where we can be spiritually ready? And that was it.
Beautiful, thank you. It ties so perfectly with that little I just led, right? Like you can, how can we in the moment, even maybe in a moment of an interaction with another person, which is kind of part of what this parsha is teaching us, right? Like how do we engage with the enemy when their ox is right in front of us, right? Like in that moment, are we spiritually ready to receive, and like Heidi did with the patient, to receive that divine download that moves through us, so that we engage in a way that uplifts wholeness and healing and love and kindness and generosity, rather than that perpetuates harm, corrosiveness, breakdown of interpersonal relationships and of community. Thank you, Austin, for bringing that in. Beautiful.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah. I love how many people have so much to add from study, from knowledge, from reading commentaries. Thank you all for all your rich contributions. We're so lucky to have so many people with so much wisdom in our community. So we'll end with the blessing after the Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam, nata b'tocheinu rucha aya shechinanu tenet haTorah. Amen.